ZenVStyle.com. 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 ZenVStyle.com.
All right, viewers, welcome to the Black Agenda Podcast. We've got another fantastic episode for you with a fantastic guest. We're joined today by Julieanna Richardson, founder and executive director of the HistoryMakers. She actually has a background in theater and American studies where she found her passion for oral history. She went on to get a law degree from Howard Law School. She even started her own production company that focused on local cable TV. Julieanna went on to found the HistoryMakers in 1990 to be the nation's largest African-American video oral history collection. And because of this, we really wanted to reach out to the organization and Julieanna and get her on the podcast because this is a really really great organization. Viewers, no one's really doing what they're doing to try to tell our story, tell our history through video. We always see it in textbooks, but with the technological generation that we have today, video is really, really popular and really, really great. So, Juliana, we are so, so thankful to have you with us today.
Oh, it's so great to be with you.
All right, so let's just get into it. It was really rewarding for us to get an opportunity to talk with you, interview you, because you've interviewed some legends, some greats. I would say that your job is pretty awesome, but also tough because you're showcasing history, our history to a society that kind of deems our history as not very important or sometimes showcases in a negative lens. So when you've had to tell our story, even in the face of maybe racism or talking to people who may ask, why does it matter? Do you find yourself maybe having to convince people in the community to take interest to your work? And, where do you draw that motivation where it seems like you're having to maybe educate people to catch up to the times and keep going?
Yeah, that has been. I've never been asked that question, but yeah, that has been an issue. Really, sometimes people didn't really know what we were. Archives sound old and dusty and not of much use. The other thing is that people understand libraries, they understand museums, but we were focused on being a digital archive without, being really present on the internet, but a very serious archive. And then I think, so the convincing, lots of people, we would have to wait years to, like Barry Gordy in Motown. It took us 14 years to convince him, but he finally said yes. But he had been watching, he and his people have been watching, as we did people like Smokey Robinson and Quincy Jones and Valerie Simpson of Ashford and Simpson. So I think he, his assistant really ended up taking to us, and he finally said yes. We do both well known and unsung, and that's important to us because sometimes people think we're just the big names, and that's not it. But we wanted to get, and we really want to do younger people in addition to older people, but we really had to focus in the first 20 years to document the older people before they passed. And so I would say, even as I speak to you today, well, there are about 800 people have passed away since that, had we not done their interviews, they may have been totally lost to history. And then we have, I would say, another significant part that are 70 and above, the majority of the collection. So when people leave, you never know when someone's going to leave. Like we just lost Tank Aaron, we just lost Mary Wilson of the Supremes. We weren't able to get Cicely Tyson. She was 96. We had John Lewis, and he and C.T. Vivian, both stalwarts in the civil rights movement, both equally significant, though C.T. Vivian got lost to John Lewis, because C.T., Reverend C.T. Vivian was older and, not, I won't say he's a household name in the civil rights community, but in the larger community, white community, they didn't know his name. And so, how do we do it where the larger community doesn't dictate to us who's important in our community? That's really a lot of the issue, that we define importance ourselves, and all the complexities that it is, to be Black in America.
Wow. And then hearing you talk about the folks that you've interviewed, you just imagine how much, the folks that you couldn't get to, how much knowledge and stories that you lose when they do, unfortunately, pass away, and they take all that knowledge and stories with them. And so we were researching and we saw that the HistoryMakers archive is actually being donated to the Library of Congress
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And it joins, the WPA slave narratives as the two, really archival things that we can hold on to that tells our story, because we don't have many places for that. And so I guess our question is just, how significant is it, for the History Makers archive to now be, being donated to the Library of Congress, and why is it important to bridge that gap between the WPA slave narratives and then also the narratives and stories of the descendants of those slaves who were featured in that archive?
Well, it's quite important. We donated the collection. I would say that a better way of saying it is that the Library of Congress is our permanent repository, because we still have ownership of the collection. But that was extremely important because video is our medium, and in the world of archives, paper can last hundreds of years. Not fax paper, but paper can last hundreds of years. Film can last 100 years. It has to be reconditioned. Video 50 to 60, and DVD and CD-ROM 3 to 7 years, and computer files get corrupted. So when you talk about permanence, we needed to have some entity that redigitize our collection every three to 4 years, and that became the Library of Congress. It's extremely important. In terms of, I would always reference the Library of Congress and the WPA slave narratives, because that was, up till we came along, the only massive attempt to record the Black experience with the first voice. And there were 2,300 interviewed between the years of 1936 and 38. But there had been virtually no attempt to record the 20th century. Well, during COVID, we've been taking a look back in different subject areas, as far back as we could find. And, whether it's in law or business or fashion and beauty or the arts or music, entertainment. And we've been finding some very interesting, things. Um, uh, Adrian, you had said that you may have political aspirations. I would ask you, who is the earliest politician that existed, and what was the year they were elected?
Oh,
Mm.
I should know this because we just put this fact out as the first African American in Congress, and I don't recall his name. I believe his last name starts with an H, but I don't recall his full name.
But that's not the first Black person elected. The first
Mm.
Black person elected was not in Congress, because first Black person elected was a man named Alexander Twilight. He was elected to the Vermont House of Representatives in 1836.
Wow.
He was a minister and an educator. But this is the only point I'm trying to make is that we know very little about
Mhm.
the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s. 1800s, we mainly think of our enslaved past, but we know very little about who these people were, um, what they did, how complicated or not their lives. Yet at the same time, we see people emerging that do a lot of things. So we don't want, at the History Makers, we don't want the 20th century to resemble the 19th, 18th, and 17th. We don't want that to happen. And that's what we're fearful of, because it's about really to happen. And so that's what I'm hoping that we as an organization can change, but we're going to need everyone working together, because our history resides in a lot of different places. Like this month, there's a program that Henry Gates is doing on the Black Church. I mean, the Black Church is a center of Black life, but a lot of the church history has not been documented. And it's probably the most singularly important institution besides schools, you know. And so that's what that's what we're, as an organization, trying to change. But we're in first of all, we're in a crisis, a really horrible crisis. And even your generation, who will be more present or more documented because of social media, but social media is not permanent, and it's held, by private hands. And so, but you're at least better documented. I mean, like, I often give the example of Beyonce. She has a very sophisticated archive with cold vault storage with 2 archivists on staff, and all of her recordings, everything, are preserved. The people who came through the 20th century, whether they be educators or doctors or lawyers, they had virtually no documentation. They don't even know a lot of times the history that they were part of or that preceded them, or is currently happening. So those are the things that because we live in a society where what is being debated, who has value and who doesn't. The people are worthless, or what did the former, whatever we call them in the White House, you call S-hole countries. I mean, all those things have an impact, because I shouldn't have to guess. Especially the issue is that we did the work. We did the work. We just need to preserve it. So we have our inheritance, and you, as 2 African American men that you seeing in front of me, that you are entitled to that inheritance, and you're entitled that it not be thrown away.
Absolutely. And it just shows, hearing you talk about it really ups the ante when you talk about the importance of not only documenting our history and the experts and the people of our generation, but also finding a way to preserve that so that the future generations actually do get to see it. In a video and in a digital way that they understand, that they're used to now. And so that was really amazing to hear that story and hear what you're focused on here in this generation. And so our next question, our next segment here. So that's going to do it for our first segment. Our second segment, we're going to take a look at how we use that. A little bit. What the next generation and what schools can do to really make sure that we expose our community to the stories and the expertise that you all have in your archive. And so we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll discuss that. Stick with us.
All right, viewers, welcome back. We're going to get into our segment 2. Remember, we're joined today by Julieanna Richardson, founder and executive director of the HistoryMakers. And Juliana, the theme of the second segment is kind of talking about how to use, the history and the value of what you got going on. And when we think about it, we really point back to education, because we think that that's where we really need to go back to, because if you educate the people, you can take care of all the symptoms that we're plagued with when you talk about our communities. And when we look at your archive, we see some amazing stories, from medicine to politics to even style. The list goes on and on. And these stories, some of them are really, really big people like John Lewis, and some are untold stories and underrepresented throughout American history. So we know that you've got the programming with school districts K through 12. We just wanted to kind of ask, generally, how popular are those programs, as far as school districts reaching out to you? And, of the school districts reaching out, do you find that it's a diverse mix, or is it maybe mostly Black districts?
Okay. So, Adrian, that's a really good question, because our whole focus was to do all of this to educate people, from the beginning to lifelong learners. And so we've been from the very beginning working with K through 12. It's been hard to get in the schools with our digital archive, because the schools did not have, for the most part, a lot of computers, and so that was a problem. So we actually, for years, then decided that if we could not bring our digital archive into the classroom, we were going to bring our HistoryMakers. We had a program called back to school with HistoryMakers. First, it was Meet the HistoryMakers, the day of education. Then it was back to school with HistoryMakers. And so we were going on one day all across the country. Our HistoryMakers would volunteer to go into the schools. And that really, I didn't really understand it because we hadn't, we haven't done it in the last 2 years because of staffing. But our history makers were upset. Like they were like, they either thought that they had been put off the list or that the schools, even schools that, where they were on strike or just, schools have all kinds of issues. And so they were calling, saying, where are history makers? So we really, so anyway, so we've been doing that program and we plan to bring it back, but in the world of COVID, we could even do a lot more, because people don't necessarily have to travel, and our history makers are like they're very willing to do that and to give back. But we have this digital archive. What is exciting now is that it now is hosted in the cloud. You can get it on your iPhone or, laptop, and it can be remote. So everything now that is at the Library of Congress, you can get now on your phone. And so we have found, like now weekly, we're being contacted by school districts now, from K through 12. We also, so that's exciting for us to see. It's really like, because I did this so it would get to the Black community. And then what you have to also understand also, which was first surprising to me, that the largest group studying us are young white females, and they're doing scholarship. And so that was like, I wanted to make sure, like, I wanted it to be the whole everybody, but I definitely wanted it to be the Black community. I mean, that people would be able to know, for us to know ourselves and all aspects of accomplishment. So the digital archive now, Howard University, in terms of universities, was the first. And in terms of HBCUs, we have Morgan and Texas Southern and FAMU and Morehouse and Spelman, University of Arkansas Pine Bluff, Fisk. And so we're looking to really grow that. We don't have Jackson State yet, but we're looking to grow that. Just wanted to say that. And
Hey, we'll be talking to their president. We'll put in a word for
yeah,
you.
you need to do that. We just got Tennessee State, but we have Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Cornell, Stanford, those, and then places you would not think, like the University of Oregon, the University of Alaska. In fact, the whole Alaska system. And that's what's fascinating to me. When we traveled both to Hawaii and Alaska to do interviews, we found that the Black history there went back there to the 1800s. And we don't think of places like that. Now, in the case of Oregon, Oregon was officially a white-only state, so they purposely kept Black people out of there. But you take some place like Montana, and Montana had a strong Black population up until like the 1940s. So these are the things that we don't know about ourselves, and I'm hoping we'll learn.
Absolutely. And that just shows you just how important it really is. And we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll have, a couple more questions. We know we're running up against it and we'll get you out of here. So we're going to take another quick break and we'll be right back. All right, listeners. So welcome back. We're continuing our conversation with Julieanna Richardson, founder and executive director of the HistoryMakers. And so we've talked at length about, what's in, kind of what's in the archive, who you've been able to interview, some incredible African Americans who've went on to do great things, artists, politicians, experts, you name it. You guys have really hit kind of all the, the different areas that you can study. And so, we wanted to kind of look at, the road ahead, I guess you could say, and what the next generation can do with this incredible information and archive and expertise that you all have documented. And so, you know, and from your point of view, being the founder and executive director, how can the next generation, millennials, us, or Gen Z, use this repository of African American leaders to help in the push in the fight for equality in a country? And so, how can they really use this archive as a weapon against that?
I think that's a great question. First of all, I'm just happy to have the opportunity to be talking to you today. And we would love we've worked for 20 years, really 7 days a week. We traveled to 413 cities and towns across the United States and interviewed almost 3,400 people. And so we have a website that is totally open, free of charge, and there are clips on there. There's biographical information. There's information there that you can't find any other place. We'd like people to use that to their heart's content. Um, and then we also have this digital archive. We charge $30 a month, but we'll work with people. But those are all 11,000 hours of our testimony is available to be looked at. And there's information, once again, that you will not find any other place. So whether it's for, school reports or plays or radio podcasts, or podcasts, we don't care. We just want it to be used because that was the whole purpose. For people to know and take and we want it done in context because we are worried about, we don't want someone's words sliced and diced, that they say something different than what they said. That's happened too much in our community. And so we'd like for the context to all be there. And we're hoping actually that we can motivate everyone. And the two of you who are, here in front of me, that you can actually take out your recorders and record your own family histories, because if to understand more about, where you came from and and what were the family backgrounds, you'll get to a point that you will regret that not knowing the things about yourself, your backgrounds, your family backgrounds. And so with that collective activity, we're hoping that in time our site that people can actually add content to our content, to sort of generate a collective, even a more collective action. So that's what we're hoping. But it's all there and we want people to use it.
Good, good. No, that's what it's all about, being able to use it, and that's a great way to kind of end this segment and wrap it up. We're going to take one more break, and the only thing we're going to do is just come back and let you wrap up our episode with your final message. That's kind of our Black Agenda style, that allows our guests to kind of send our episode off to our viewers in a great big old bow. So, viewers, stick with us. We'll be right back with Julieanna's final message. All right, viewers, let's get back into it here. We've got, remember, Julieanna Richardson, founder and executive director of the HistoryMakers, with us today. And, Julieanna, the first thing we wanted to just say to end off is that you're a history maker yourself. I mean, you're someone who, going throughout, saw, those half truths. Even Devin and I went through those same half truths that we were taught in school, but you focus your energy on correcting that void in society. And Devin and I, we really, really appreciate that, and we really work because that's important. But there are a lot of Americans who aren't like Devin and myself, who think that those efforts may not be as important. Some people may even call them noise or call them divisive because it may highlight other minorities and not, some other minority groups. So, Julieanna, as a final message, we just wanted you to leave us with a great argument to kind of counter that narrative and inspire other people to be like you and work to be a history maker?
I think that there's this project is about identity. And I don't think there's anyone walking around on the face of the earth that could say that self-identity is not important. Everybody needs to have some form of roots, something to call their own. When I was a young kid and had no sense of identity, and I often tell the story of being in a class where everybody's, raising their hands, talking about what their background was, and I didn't know mine. And that feeling of not knowing stayed with me. It sort of haunted me. I would say in today's world that I would like to refer to myself as an activist, archivist. I didn't start out to be an archivist. But the thing is that if we do not record it, like if we do not document and record, then it really does not exist. And we're in a society where who has value and who doesn't, meaning like they have to be shown that you have value. And so every Black person has to really rally around this because we have more to gain with collective action than we have to, and we have a lot to lose. We will find ourselves on the revolving, just revolving that who are they? What did they really contribute? Our hand-me-downs on the exceptional and only putting up the exceptional Black person. Those days have got to end because there would be no United States of America if it weren't for the Black experience. There would be no American music without Black music. There would be, I could go on and on. There would be no Washington, D.C. had our formerly enslaved not helped build that city. So that's what I'm saying is that we have to take this seriously. It's more important than almost anything that we can do. So while we're taking to the streets, let's also take and record our history and preserve it so the world will see it.
Yeah, that's a great way to end, the episode there with folks just understanding the importance of, documenting what happened, because we now know, looking back on the history that we were taught in school, like you say, if it wasn't recorded, it didn't happen. Slaves oftentimes they didn't have daily journals to just write down things that were happening. So the story that got told in textbooks and in film was skewed. It was told wrong.
That's right.
And we're now having to re-educate an entire generation of people that know the things you learned in school weren't quite accurate. You got half the story, and
Correct.
so that's why.
They were
That's
not
why we
correct.
have that.
That's right.
Exactly. That's
right.
why we have the history makers
That's
to try to thwart those types of miseducation that's going around. And so Dr. Julieanna Richardson, we thank you for joining us and giving us your time. Again, she's the founder and executive director of the History Makers. And so me and Adrian, I'm sure we both enjoyed it. Adrian, you got any final thoughts?
No, like I said, Julieanna, you are a history maker. I don't know if you've had one of your interviewers do an interview with you, but make sure you have something in the archive talking about you, because, like I said, you are. It's incredible the work that you're doing, and that you're just establishing this organization. So, like I said, if you don't have an interview already in the archives, please do. We'll loan you ours.
Okay, well, that's great. Adrian and Dev, it was just lovely. So let's say until we meet again. Thank you.
Thank you so much.